On May 5, 1980, the eyes of the world were fixed on a quiet, leafy square in South Kensington, London. At 16 Prince's Gate, a 6-day standoff at the Iranian embassy was reaching a violent and inevitable crescendo. For the American counterterrorism community, the images flickering across their television screens were more than just breaking news. They were a revelation. Only 10 days prior, the United States had suffered its most stinging military humiliation of the era, the catastrophic failure of Operation Eagle Claw in the Iranian desert. As the sun began to set over London, the contrast could not have been more stark. While the Pentagon was still reeling from burned-out wreckage and lost lives in a failed rescue attempt, they were now watching a small, enigmatic unit from Hereford do the impossible in broad daylight. The siege had begun on April 30th, when 6 armed members of the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan stormed the building. They took 26 hostages, demanding the release of prisoners in Iran and their own safe passage out of the United Kingdom. For 5 days, the British government, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, maintained a policy of controlled patience. However, the SAS, the Special Air Service, had been preparing from the moment the first shot was fired. They had constructed a life-size replica of the embassy at a nearby barracks, rehearsing room-clearing drills until the movements were instinctive. Their presence was a closely guarded secret, hidden from the press and the public, until the terrorists murdered a hostage and dumped his body onto the pavement. In Washington, officials at the FBI and the fledgling Delta Force watched the live BBC feed with a mixture of professional curiosity and profound anxiety. They saw figures clad in black overalls and S6 gas masks rappelling from the roof, a sight so alien and futuristic that it redefined the image of the modern commando. This was not the sprawling, multi-service machinery of the American military. This was a surgical strike force. As the first flashbang grenades detonated, shattering the windows and the silence of Prince's Gate, the Americans realized they were witnessing a masterclass in hostage rescue that would fundamentally alter the doctrine of Western special operations forever. The transition from a police-led negotiation to a military-led assault was a watershed moment in British domestic policy, and it was executed with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency that stunned American observers. In London, the Home Secretary, Willie Whitelaw, remained in a crisis room under the Cabinet Office, while the SAS commander on the ground, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rose, awaited the final green light. The legal framework was clear. Once the terrorists began killing hostages, the police surrendered control to the Ministry of Defense. For the Americans, whose own command structure during Operation Eagle Claw had been plagued by inter-service rivalry and a lack of clear jurisdictional authority, this seamless handoff was the first of many shocks. It represented a level of political and military integration that the United States had not yet mastered. The SAS had spent the preceding days gathering intelligence through remarkably low-tech yet effective means. Technicians from British Gas were instructed to drill holes in the walls of adjacent buildings to insert microphones and fiber-optic snake cameras. They even arranged for the flight paths into Heathrow Airport to be altered, ensuring the roar of low-flying jets would mask the sound of the SAS teams as they moved into their final assault positions. This meticulous attention to environmental detail was a hallmark of the regiment. While the U.S. military often relied on overwhelming technological superiority, the SAS prioritized the human factor, using the urban landscape as a weapon. They understood that the embassy was not just a building, it was a fortress that required a surgical rather than a sledgehammer approach. By 1923, on that fateful Monday, 2 teams, designated Red and Blue, were in position. Team Blue rappelled from the roof at the rear of the building, while Team Red prepared to enter through the first-floor balcony at the front. The plan was a pincer movement designed to clear the 6 floors simultaneously, forcing the terrorists into the center of the building where they could be neutralized. The equipment they carried, the MP5 submachine gun and the flashbang grenade, was relatively new to the public eye. The MP5, in particular, would soon become the global gold standard for counterterrorism. But on this day, its rapid, staccato fire was a terrifyingly efficient sound that marked the end of the terrorists' leverage. The Americans, who were still debating the merits of various short-barreled rifles and sidearms for their own units, realized they were looking at the future of close-quarters battle. The moment the assault began, the operational reality of Operation Nimrod diverged sharply from any previous military engagement televised to a global audience. As the blue team rappelled down the rear of the building, one trooper, one staff sergeant, became entangled in his ropes. In a moment of sheer secondary horror, his boots smashed through a window, alerting the terrorists inside, while his colleagues' explosive charges accidentally ignited the curtains near him. Palmer was suspended in the air, caught between a burning building and a sheer drop, yet the discipline of the regiment held firm. His teammates continued their descent, entering the smoke-filled rooms with a singular focus that U.S. observers would later describe as fearsome. This was not just a rescue. It was a high-speed execution of tactical superiority. Inside the embassy, the environment was a chaotic nightmare of thick black smoke, the smell of cordite, and the deafening roar of stun grenades. The SAS troopers moved in two-man pairs, utilizing a technique known as selective fire. While the American doctrine at the time often emphasized overwhelming firepower to suppress an enemy, the SAS practiced extreme surgical precision. They had to distinguish between a hostage and a terrorist in less than a fraction of a second in near-zero visibility. One terrorist, one of the gunmen, was discovered hiding among the hostages in the second-floor telex room. Despite the chaos, the troopers identified him immediately and neutralized him with a burst of submachine gun fire that missed the surrounding hostages by mere inches. This level of individual marksmanship and composure under extreme duress was what truly shocked the counterterrorism experts at Delta Force and the FBI. In the post-mission analysis, American analysts noted that the SAS didn't just clear rooms. They owned them the moment they stepped through the threshold. The speed of the assault, just 11 minutes from the first explosion to the final hostage being secured, shattered the existing timelines for such operations. The British had proven that a small, highly specialized unit could achieve strategic results that an entire division of conventional infantry could not. For the U.S. military, which was still wedded to large-scale, multi-layered planning, the simplicity and lethality of the SAS approach was a paradigm shift that would lead to the total overhaul of American special tactics. As the fire ignited by the thermal lances and flashbangs began to consume the embassy's upper floors, the mission entered its most controversial and tactically decisive phase. The SAS troopers were now operating in a literal furnace, their black Nomex suits providing only temporary protection against the intensifying heat. On the main staircase, a bottleneck of panicked hostages was being funneled downward by the blue team. Amidst this human tide, the terrorists attempted one final, desperate act of subversion. Shaker Abdullah Radhil and Abbas Hafid were discovered attempting to blend in with the captives, clutching grenades with the pins pulled. The SAS response was instantaneous and uncompromising. In the narrow, smoke-choked confines of the back staircase, the troopers identified the threat and opened fire with surgical precision, ensuring the terrorists were neutralized before they could detonate their explosives. To the counterterror experts at the FBI and Delta Force, this was the coldness of the SAS that would become legendary. There was no hesitation, no attempt to negotiate once the threshold had been crossed. The British commandos had been given a clear mandate: to eliminate the threat and preserve the lives of the innocent. This binary approach to lethal force was a stark departure from the more restrained rules of engagement typically practiced by domestic law enforcement in the United States. The SAS view was that in a high-speed hostage rescue, any delay was a death sentence for the hostages. Watching the bodies of the gunmen being dragged down the steps, American observers realized that the British were not just better trained. They possessed a psychological readiness for high-stakes violence that the U.S. military was only beginning to cultivate. By the time the last hostage was ushered onto the back lawn, 5 of the 6 terrorists were dead. The 6th, Fauzi Nejad, was only spared because he was found by the hostages and troopers in the garden, where the presence of the media and the sheer number of witnesses made an immediate tactical execution impossible. The entire operation had taken less than 15 minutes from the first breach to the final all clear. As the troopers stripped off their masks, revealing soot-stained faces and calm expressions, they looked less like traditional soldiers and more like specialized technicians of war. For the United States, which had spent months planning for a mission in Iran that failed before it even reached the target, the logistical and tactical economy of Operation Nimrod was a profound shock to the system. In the immediate aftermath of the Prince's Gate assault, the political and military ripple effects crossed the Atlantic with the speed of a telegram. For American counterterror experts, the shock of the SAS success was magnified by the timing. It served as a brutal mirror to the flaws inherent in the United States' own approach to unconventional warfare. The SAS had demonstrated that a specialized unit required more than just elite personnel. It required an autonomous command structure and the unwavering support of the national leadership. In London, Margaret Thatcher's Iron Lady persona was forged in part by her refusal to blink during the siege, a quality that American analysts noted was essential for the success of such high-risk operations. They realized that the British model wasn't just about the rappelling and the shooting. It was about a national doctrine that accepted the possibility of total failure in exchange for the chance of total victory. The technical analysis conducted by U.S. observers focused heavily on the black kit that had now become the global face of counterterrorism. Before May 1980, many tactical units in the U.S. still operated in standard olive drab or camouflage fatigue uniforms. The SAS choice of black Nomex suits was not merely for intimidation. It was a practical response to the flashover fires common in close-quarters explosive entry. Moreover, the use of the AC-100 ballistic helmet and the S-6 respirator provided a psychological barrier between the trooper and the terrorist, turning the rescuers into faceless, unstoppable entities. American experts were particularly impressed by the integration of the flashbang, a device developed by the SAS themselves in the late 1970s. This distraction device proved that the most effective way to win a room was to weaponize the enemy's own senses against them, a concept that would soon become a pillar of American SWAT and Delta Force training. Perhaps the most significant realization for the American experts was the Hereford mentality, a culture of relentless self-criticism and adaptation. Following the mission, the SAS did not simply celebrate. They conducted an exhaustive debriefing, identifying every minor equipment failure and tactical hesitation. They analyzed why Staff Sergeant Palmer's rope had snagged and why the curtains had caught fire, seeking to engineer out the variables of bad luck. This pursuit of perfection stood in stark contrast to the post-Eagle Claw atmosphere in Washington, which was characterized by finger-pointing and bureaucratic defense. The British had shown that true elite status was not a rank or a title, but a continuous process of evolution. For the Americans, the embassy siege was the catalyst that finally silenced the internal skeptics of special operations, paving the way for the creation of USOCOM and the modern, unified command structure the U.S. utilizes today. The legacy of Operation Nimrod did not end with the extinguishing of the fires at Prince's Gate. Rather, it became the foundation for the modern era of global special operations. For the United States, the flawless performance of the Special Air Service was the final piece of evidence needed to overcome the bureaucratic inertia and inter-service rivalry that had stifled its own elite units for decades. In the years following 1980, the special relationship between the SAS and the United States Delta Force deepened significantly, moving from a position of mutual respect to a rigorous, formalized exchange of doctrine, equipment, and personnel. The British had provided a clear proof of concept that a small, highly trained, and politically supported force could solve the most intractable national crises with surgical precision. This realization led directly to the legislative push for the Goldwater-Nichols Act and the eventual establishment of the U.S. Special Operations Command in 1987, ensuring that American special operators would never again face the fragmented command structure that led to the tragedy at Desert One. Ultimately, the reason U.S. counterterror experts were so shocked by the SAS was not merely because of the technical proficiency on display, but because the British had achieved a level of operational maturity that the U.S. military was still striving to cultivate. The SAS had shown the world that in the unforgiving environment of counterterrorism, there is no substitute for the combination of simplicity, speed, and controlled aggression. Today, the images of those black-clad figures rappelling into the thick smoke of South Kensington remain the definitive visual representation of special operations, a moment when the shadowy world of the quiet professionals was revealed to the public, setting a standard of excellence that every elite unit across the globe still measures itself against. Those 11 minutes at Prince's Gate did more than just save 24 lives. They redefined the limits of military possibility and tactical intervention in the late 20th century. If you found this operational analysis of the Iranian embassy siege insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into military history. Your support allows us to continue producing high-quality, fact-based documentaries on the world's most elite fighting forces. Share this video with fellow history enthusiasts and let us know in the comments which mission or unit you would like us to analyze next. Thank you for watching.